The billionaire said to his wife, "I want a child, but not with you." 5 words that shattered a woman's heart and changed a billionaire's life forever. Have you ever watched someone speak words they could never take back? Words that hung in the air like poison, destroying everything they touched? I'm about to tell you a story about Maxwell Grant, a man who had everything except the wisdom to know what mattered, and the woman who walked away from him carrying a secret that would bring him to his knees 2 years later. She wouldn't be alone when he saw her again, and what he'd see staring back at him would break him in ways no business ever could. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to the channel. To all my loyal subscribers, thank you so much for always being here, for watching, commenting, and showing love. You are the reason I keep telling these stories every day. And if this is your first time here, I want to say a warm welcome to you. This is a place where stories heal, inspire, and remind us that love always finds a way back home. Before we begin, let me say a quick prayer for you. Father, I thank you for every wonderful person watching right now. Bless the work of their hands, give peace to their hearts, and surround their homes with joy and protection. Let this week bring unexpected favor, good news, and quiet rest for their souls. In Jesus' name, amen. If you felt that prayer, comment, amen, and tell me the time of where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story. Someone out there might need the hope it carries. Now let's begin, because this story will touch your heart in ways you won't forget. Maxwell Grant didn't build a billion-dollar empire by trusting people. He built it by understanding that every relationship was a transaction, every emotion a liability, every vulnerability a crack in the armor that protected him from a world that took everything if you let it. At 42, he sat in his corner office on the 63rd floor of the building that bore his name, looking out over a city he'd conquered while feeling absolutely nothing. Grant Industries dominated tech and real estate across 3 continents, and Maxwell dominated Grant Industries with an iron fist wrapped in Armani suits and titanium watches that cost more than most people earned in a year. His philosophy was simple and had never failed him. Emotions are weaknesses, love is a distraction, and the moment you let someone matter, they own you. But philosophies born from childhood wounds have a way of destroying the very things that might heal them, don't they? The city sprawled beneath him like a kingdom, but kingdoms built on isolation are just expensive prisons, and Maxwell Grant was the loneliest king alive. His phone buzzed with another crisis: insider trading allegations, employee exploitation rumors, tabloids circling like vultures smelling blood. And for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, Maxwell felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. His PR team was panicking, his lawyers were hedging, and his board was questioning whether the man who'd built this empire could save it from the scandal threatening to burn it all down. The board hired Dr. Nora Hayes without asking Maxwell's permission, and that was his first taste of losing control. She walked into his office on a Tuesday morning with credentials that read like a Harvard fantasy. PhD in organizational psychology, crisis management specialist, who'd salvaged reputations everyone else had declared dead on arrival. Published author on authentic leadership in an era of corporate distrust. Maxwell had dismissed her before she opened her mouth. Another consultant selling snake oil and buzzwords. Another person who wanted something from him. Their first meeting was in the boardroom with 14 executives watching, and Nora dismantled his entire crisis strategy in under 10 minutes with a precision that was almost surgical. "You're treating a human problem like a mechanical one," she said, and her voice carried authority that didn't ask for permission. "People don't trust corporations, Mr. Grant. They trust authenticity. And right now, you're giving them a PR machine when what they need is a human being willing to be accountable." The room went silent because nobody spoke to Maxwell Grant like that. Nobody challenged him in front of his own people. Nobody looked him in the eye without flinching. But Nora Hayes wasn't looking for his approval, wasn't impressed by his billion-dollar view or his reputation for crushing anyone who opposed him. And that made her the most dangerous person who'd ever walked into his world. Maxwell was intrigued despite every instinct screaming at him to fire her immediately, because in 20 years of people wanting something from him, Nora Hayes wanted absolutely nothing, and he didn't know how to fight someone who couldn't be bought. The tension in that boardroom was electric, Intellectual warfare, disguised as professional disagreement. And beneath it all was something neither of them acknowledged, but both felt. Attraction wrapped in antagonism. Respect masking something far more complicated. Late nights became their rhythm. Maxwell finding excuses to stay in the office when Nora was working, telling himself he needed to oversee the crisis management strategy, while knowing damn well he just wanted to watch her mind work. She'd stand at the whiteboard mapping out communication plans and stakeholder analyses. Her hair escaping its professional twist, her blazer abandoned on a chair, and Maxwell would lose track of entire sentences just watching the way she thought. Their conversations deepened in those midnight hours when defenses crumbled under exhaustion and honesty felt safer in darkness. He told her about growing up poor, about a father who drank away paychecks, and a mother who worked 3 jobs and died tired, about building his empire from rage and fear of ever being powerless again. Nora listened without pity, without judgment, and then she said something that cracked his chest open. "You're not scary, Maxwell. You're lonely. There's a difference." The words hung between them like a confession neither had meant to make. The physical tension built with every accidental touch, every moment their hands brushed reaching for the same document, every time he stood too close behind her chair reading over her shoulder and felt her breath catch. They were aware of each other in ways that had nothing to do with crisis management and everything to do with two people who'd built walls finally meeting someone capable of seeing through them. Then came the question that changed everything, delivered at 3 in the morning over cold coffee and scattered papers. "When did you stop being a person and become a brand, Maxwell?" Nora asked, and her eyes held something that looked dangerously like caring. Maxwell's walls began to crack because nobody had ever asked him that. Nobody had ever looked past the empire to see the man who'd disappeared inside it. He told her things he'd never told anyone. About nights so lonely they physically hurt, about success that tasted like ashes, about wondering if this was all there was, and being terrified the answer was yes. Dawn broke over the city skyline, painting everything gold, and they sat there acknowledging a connection neither could ignore anymore, a truth that terrified him more than any business deal ever had. "I don't know how to do this," Maxwell admitted, and Nora's smile was sad and understanding. "Do what?" she asked, though they both knew. "Be human," he said. "Be anything other than what I built." And that's when everything began to fall apart, because Maxwell Grant didn't know that some walls exist to protect others from us, and some exist to protect us from ever having to risk being loved. The evening started innocently enough, Maxwell and Nora reviewing final reports in his office at 9 p.m., both exhausted from weeks of crisis management that had finally turned the tide in Grant Industries' favor. The scandal was contained, the narrative shifted, and the board had sent congratulatory emails praising Nora's strategy, while Maxwell sat across from her realizing her contract was ending and she'd be gone in days. Exhaustion has a way of dissolving barriers we spend years building, doesn't it? And somewhere between the last presentation slide and the silence that followed, the professional distance they'd maintained crumbled into something raw and honest. Maxwell looked at her in the dim office light and said words he'd never said to anyone. "I don't want to be alone right now." It wasn't a proposition or a command, just truth spoken by a man who'd forgotten how to ask for anything that mattered. Nora could have left, should have left, but instead she stood and crossed the space between them. And their first kiss was tentative like neither quite believed it was happening, then consuming like two people who'd been drowning finally breaking the surface. They moved to the leather couch that had witnessed 1,000 business deals, but never anything about this human. City lights stretching below them as the only witnesses to what happened next. Clothes were shed with trembling hands that revealed vulnerability in every touch. And this wasn't just physical. This was emotional nakedness. Two people finally seeing and being seen in ways they'd both protected themselves from for years. Maxwell traced the curve of Nora's spine and whispered confessions between kisses, about wanting her from the first moment she challenged him, about being terrified of exactly this, about not knowing how to be soft when he'd spent a lifetime being steel. Nora's hands mapped the tension he carried in his shoulders, the scars from a childhood spent fighting, and she whispered back her own truths. That she'd never let anyone this close, that she was scared too, that something about him made her want to try anyway. The intensity between them was the kind that happens when two lonely people finally connect, when years of isolation crack open and everything pours out at once. They made love like it might save them, like intimacy could heal wounds they'd both been carrying alone, and for those hours wrapped in each other with dawn approaching, maybe it did. Morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, finding them tangled together on leather that would forever smell like her perfume. Both shaken by the depth of what had just happened, because this wasn't casual, wasn't just physical release. This was the kind of connection that changes everything. The aftermath hung heavy in the silence, Maxwell's hand in Nora's hair, her head on his chest listening to his heartbeat slow, both knowing something fundamental had shifted and neither sure what came next. Then Nora spoke quietly, breaking the moment with words that would destroy everything they just built. "I need to tell you something." Nora sat up, wrapped in Maxwell's shirt, vulnerability written across her face, as she forced herself to say what her heart needed. "I want something real, Maxwell. Marriage, one day. A child who knows both of us. Not games, not whatever this is where we pretend it doesn't matter. Real." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled, and Maxwell felt every fear he'd ever protected himself with rising up to choke him. His face went cold, walls slamming back into place with a speed that should have been impossible. And when he spoke, his voice carried the same ice he used to destroy competitors who threatened his empire. "You're confusing intimacy with ownership, Nora. I'm Maxwell Grant. You're someone who works in my building. Have you ever watched someone you loved become a stranger in seconds, their face closing off until you couldn't recognize the person who'd held you an hour before?" Nora's reaction was pure devastation, hurt flashing across her features before the coldness set in, before the dignity that had always defined her reassembled itself into armor. She stood methodically, dressing with graceful efficiency, while Maxwell watched frozen, already realizing he'd made a catastrophic mistake, but too proud and too terrified to take it back. Her departure was final, each movement deliberate, and she didn't slam the door or scream or beg, which somehow made it worse. Maxwell tried at the last second, his voice cracking. "Nora, wait." But she turned with eyes that held nothing but disappointment and something that looked like pity. "I told you I wanted something real, Maxwell. You told me I wasn't worth it." Message received. The door closed with a quiet click that sounded like a coffin lid, and Maxwell Grant sat in his billion-dollar office, surrounded by evidence of their night together, understanding too late that he'd just destroyed the only real thing he'd ever had. Maxwell approved Nora's resignation the next morning, another act of cowardice disguised as professional courtesy, and threw himself into work with desperate intensity that fooled absolutely no one. His empire grew, new deals closed, stock prices climbed, and his soul emptied with each hollow victory until he was just going through motions that used to mean everything. Colleagues noticed the change. The sharp wit that had made him legendary dulled to mechanical responses. The commanding presence that filled rooms faded into something ghost-like and diminished. He spent late nights staring at his phone, drafting texts he never sent, apologies that felt inadequate, explanations that sounded like excuses, everything deleted. Because what could he possibly say that would undo 5 words that had destroyed her? Maxwell became a ghost in his own life, haunting the penthouse that echoed with emptiness, sitting in boardrooms making decisions that increased his wealth while the weight of regret pressed down like concrete. The city he'd conquered from his office windows looked different now, everyone else's lit windows containing lives and love and meaning while his contained nothing but expensive furniture and the memory of the morning he'd thrown away his only chance at being human. Nora discovered she was pregnant 3 weeks after leaving Grant Industries. 2 pink lines appearing on a test she took with trembling hands, and somehow no fear at all. The decision crystallized instantly with a clarity that surprised her. She would do this alone rather than beg for love from a man who'd made his position devastatingly clear. Medical forms asked for father's information, and Nora left them blank, her resolve hardening with each doctor's appointment attended solo. "You'll never have to beg for love, baby. Never." She built her own consulting firm from the ground up, working from home with a growing belly, taking calls between prenatal vitamins and nursery planning, proving to herself and her unborn child that they didn't need Maxwell Grant's money or his name or anything except her determination. Labor came 16 hours long and terrifying. Nora alone, except for nurses who held her hand through contractions that felt like her body was tearing apart. But she was determined because this child deserved a mother who was strong enough to do hard things. When they finally placed her daughter on her chest, Nora looked into eyes that were unmistakably Maxwell's and felt love so fierce it obliterated every remaining piece of her broken heart. "Hi, sweet girl," she whispered to the tiny human who'd made her a mother. "I've been waiting for you." She named her Harper because it meant joy, and that's what this child would know: joy and love, and a mother who chose her every single day. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't holding on, it's letting go and building something beautiful from a wreckage. And if Nora's strength is hitting you right now, show some love with a like and drop a comment. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who couldn't see your worth? 2 years had transformed Nora Hayes into someone Maxwell wouldn't have recognized. Not because she looked different, but because she'd become fully herself in ways that freedom and motherhood make possible. Her consulting firm had exploded beyond anything she'd imagined. Fortune 500 companies competing for her expertise in authentic leadership and organizational transformation. Her calendar booked 18 months out with speaking engagements and retainer contracts that proved she'd never needed Maxwell Grant's empire to build her own. Raising Harper alone had carved out reserves of strength Nora hadn't known existed. The kind that comes from 3 a.m. fevers and toddler tantrums in grocery stores and figuring out how to be enough when you're all your child has. She created a support system that felt like family. Sarah, who watched Harper during client calls, Marcus and his husband, who did impromptu pizza dinners when Nora worked late, the neighbors who'd become aunties and uncles to a little girl who knew she was loved by an entire village. Harper, at nearly 3, was curious and fearless, with Maxwell's steel-gray eyes that saw everything, asking 10,000 questions about how clouds worked and why birds flew and whether the moon followed them home. Her laugh infectious, and her stubbornness inherited from both parents in equal measure. The invitation to deliver the keynote address at the National Leadership Summit had arrived 6 months prior, and Nora accepted, because she'd earned this platform through work that mattered, through rebuilding herself into someone who helped others lead with integrity. She had no idea Maxwell would be there, no reason to think the billionaire CEO, who'd made it clear she was nothing to him, would care about a conference on authentic leadership and corporate accountability. Packing for the trip meant coordinating Harper's favorite stuffed elephant and the specific pink cup she refused to drink from anything else. The ordinary chaos of single motherhood that Nora had learned to navigate with practiced efficiency and occasional exhaustion and always love. Maxwell attended the National Leadership Summit for one reason only. He'd heard through connections he'd spent 2 years maintaining that Nora Hayes would be speaking, and 2 years of regret had driven him to this moment with desperation that felt like drowning. He watched her keynote from the back row of an auditorium holding 800 people, all of them captivated by the woman on stage who commanded attention through authenticity rather than authority. Nora had transformed into someone stronger, more confident, thriving in ways that proved she'd never needed him at all, and Maxwell felt the weight of that truth like a physical blow. Her speech on authentic leadership cut through corporate buzzwords with surgical precision, her voice steady as she spoke about vulnerability and courage and the difference between power and influence. "Accountability isn't a weakness," Nora said, her eyes scanning the crowd without seeing Maxwell hidden in shadows. "It's the foundation of trust, and without trust, you're not leading. You're just managing people who'll leave the moment something better comes along." The irony wasn't lost on Maxwell. Sitting in darkness listening to the woman he destroyed teach 800 people the lesson he'd learned too late. He recognized with devastating clarity that she'd become everything she was meant to be despite him, not because of him. Her success built on principles he'd mocked and wisdom he'd dismissed and strength he'd underestimated. The decision to approach her during the reception felt like walking toward his own execution, terror and hope warring in his chest in equal measure. But 2 years of drafting unsent texts and rehearsing apologies had led to this moment, and Maxwell Grant hadn't built an empire by being a coward even if he'd lost everything by being one. The reception hall chaos worked in Maxwell's favor. Hundreds of people networking over cocktails and appetizers. The noise providing cover as he moved through the crowd toward Nora, standing near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city. Maxwell approached slowly, every instinct screaming warnings. And when he spoke her name the first time in 2 years, the word felt like confession and prayer and apology all at once. Nora turned, her face cycling through shock and anger and something carefully neutral, before settling into guardedness that broke his heart because she'd never needed to protect herself from him before he taught her to. Their first words carried tension and formality and unresolved pain thick enough to taste. Peter Williams, hovering nearby with protective energy that told Maxwell someone had been there for Nora when he'd abandoned her. "You were incredible up there," Maxwell said, and it sounded inadequate even to his own ears. "Thank you," Nora replied with professional distance that hurt worse than anger would have, and Maxwell was trying to find words for an apology 2 years overdue when everything shattered. A child's cry cut through cocktail party noise like a siren, commotion erupting near the entrance where conference staff looked panicked, and then a small voice calling with desperate urgency, "Mama! Mama!" Nora's transformation was instantaneous. Every maternal instinct engaged as she moved toward the sound without thought, and Maxwell followed, because something in that cry felt important in ways he couldn't name yet. Harper had escaped the childcare suite, her yellow dress rumpled and messy ponytails coming undone, tear-streaked face searching frantically until she spotted her mother and launched herself forward with toddler desperation. Nora scooped her up instantly, the world fading away as she comforted her daughter with whispered reassurances and gentle rocking. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. Mama's got you." Harper's face turned then, still crying but calming in her mother's arms, and Maxwell saw his own eyes staring back at him from a toddler's face, steel gray and unmistakable. The curve of her jaw and the set of her mouth mirror images of photographs from his own childhood. The champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against marble floors, reality crashing over him in waves that threatened to pull him under. He had a daughter. This child was his. Nora had been pregnant when she left, and he'd never known. The timeline calculated itself in his head with brutal efficiency, the math undeniable. Every feature on Harper's face screaming biological truth that couldn't be hidden or denied. Maxwell's voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. "How old is she?" Nora's fierce protection flared instantly, her body angling to shield Harper from Maxwell's gaze. "She's mine. That's all you need to know." But Maxwell's realization had already spoken itself aloud, the words escaping before he could stop them. "She's mine too." Nora's correction came sharp and final. "My daughter." The public scene unfolded with the horror of a car crash happening in slow motion. Hundreds of people watching, whispers spreading through the reception hall like wildfire as they recognized Maxwell Grant and connected dots that made scandal-worthy headlines. Peter intervened, trying to create space and privacy, but Harper was frightened by the tension radiating off the adults, crying harder now, and Nora's anger erupted with 2 years of hurt behind it. "You made it very clear I was nothing to you, Maxwell. So forgive me if I decided to protect my daughter from ever hearing those words." The weight of what he'd missed hit Maxwell like physical blows. Birth, first smile, first steps, first words, 2 years of moments he could never get back. A daughter who didn't know his face or his name or that he existed. Nora moved toward the exit with Harper in her arms, and Maxwell chased them through the reception hall and down emergency stairs to the parking garage, his expensive shoes echoing on concrete as he called her name desperately. Nora turned when she reached her car, Harper's face buried in her mother's neck, and the honesty that poured out was devastating in its simplicity. She told him about doing it all alone, 16 hours of labor with no one to hold her hand, midnight fevers where she'd been terrified her baby would stop breathing, the first time Harper said mama, and there was no one to share the joy with, building a life from scratch while carrying the weight of his rejection like stones in her pockets. Maxwell sank to his knees on oil-stained concrete, literally broken, and Nora looked down at him with something that might have been pity if it weren't so tired. "Goodbye, Maxwell," she said, buckling Harper into a car seat with practiced efficiency. And the finality in those 2 words felt like a door closing on any chance of redemption. Hit pause for just a second, Because if this moment is wrecking you the way it should be, smash that like button and subscribe because this story isn't over and you need to see what happens next. Security found Maxwell still on his knees in the parking garage 3 hours after Nora drove away, the concrete cold beneath expensive suit pants, and his phone filled with missed calls from his assistant that he couldn't bring himself to answer. The drive back to his hotel took him through unfamiliar residential streets, where he watched other people's normal lives through lit windows. Families eating dinner together, parents reading bedtime stories. The ordinary magic he'd convinced himself didn't matter until he'd seen it in Nora's arms. His hotel room was sterile and lonely and fitting for a man who'd built an empire in isolation, the king-sized bed mocking him with its emptiness. And Maxwell sat on the edge, staring at his phone, trying to find words that could possibly bridge 2 years of absence and a lifetime of damage. He called Nora 17 times over 3 days, each one going straight to voicemail, texts marked read, but never answered, emails that disappeared into silence that felt like judgment. Reaching out through Peter Williams was an act of desperation, and Peter's blunt assessment cut deeper than any business rival ever had. You really hurt her, Maxwell. Not just walked away, destroyed her, made her question her worth, her judgment, everything. The agreement came with conditions that felt like parole. Peter would ask Nora, but Maxwell had to respect whatever answer she gave, had to understand that this wasn't about him or his regrets or his desire for redemption. This was about a little girl who deserved better than a father who might disappear. The agonizing wait stretched for 6 days that felt like 6 years, Maxwell checking his phone every 30 seconds like a man addicted. Hope and terror taking turns crushing his chest until the text finally came from an unknown number. Saturday, 10 a.m., Brighton Park. Come alone. Maxwell arrived 45 minutes early, watching from his car like a stalker. And when Nora's vehicle pulled in, at exactly 10, his heart stopped the sight of her, helping Harper out of the car seat with practiced maternal efficiency. Pink sneakers hit pavement, followed by small legs in denim overalls. Braided hair that Nora had clearly spent time perfecting. And Harper's hand reaching up to hold her mother's with trust that made Maxwell's throat close. He approached slowly, carefully, every movement telegraphed, so Nora wouldn't feel ambushed. And when they were close enough to speak, Nora's conditions came before any greeting. I'm not doing this for you, Maxwell. I'm doing this because I had to explain to Harper why a stranger made Mama cry, and she asked if the man was sorry, and I couldn't lie to her. Maxwell knelt to be at Harper's eye level, his daughter studying him with the serious intensity only toddlers possess, and the words came out shaking. Hi, Harper. I'm Maxwell. I'm your father. Harper's question was immediate and devastating in its simplicity. Why? Why was he sorry? Why had he made Mama cry? Why hadn't he been there before? The question contained multitudes that Maxwell would spend years answering. Because I made a mistake, sweetheart. A big one. Harper processed this with the logic only children possess, her small face thoughtful before delivering wisdom that gutted him. Mama say sorry when mistake. The permission to stay came with time boxes and boundaries. For a little while, don't push, let Harper lead. And Maxwell spent the next hour watching his daughter play on swings and slides, learning that she was fearless like her mother and stubborn like him and completely perfect in ways that made his chest ache. The rules Nora established were non-negotiable. Show up consistently. Don't make promises you can't keep. Earn your place in Harper's life one day at a time. And Maxwell agreed to everything, because what choice did he have except to finally do the work he should have done 2 years ago? Weekly visits became routine, Maxwell restructuring his entire life around Harper's schedule in ways that shocked everyone who knew him. Board meetings moved and deals delayed, because Saturday mornings belonged to his daughter now. Learning to be patient meant letting Harper set the pace, following her lead through parks and playgrounds, answering endless questions about why grass was green and where clouds went at night with the seriousness her curiosity deserved. Small victories accumulated like compound interest, Harper warming to him gradually. The first time she laughed at his joke, the afternoon she asked if he'd come to her dance class, each moment a gift Maxwell hadn't earned but received with trembling gratitude. The dance class meant sitting with other parents who had no idea he was a billionaire CEO, just another dad in jeans watching his daughter. And Maxwell discovered Harper had her mother's grace and his determination, pushing through routines with resilience that made him absurdly proud. After-class conversations became his favorite part. Harper's breathless explanations of what she'd learned delivered with hand gestures and enthusiasm that lit up her whole face, and Maxwell memorized every word like they were sacred texts. The scrape knee incident happened on a playground 4 months into their routine visits, Harper falling off the monkey bars and crying with that particular terror that comes from unexpected pain, and Maxwell reached her first, his instincts surprising him with their ferocity. He comforted her with gentle hands and had signed billion-dollar deals, but had never done anything more important than this. Cleaning the wound with supplies from Nora's ever-prepared bag, applying the bandage with care that made Harper's crying subside into hiccups. Her trust in that vulnerable moment felt like absolution Maxwell didn't deserve, and when she leaned into his chest seeking comfort, something fundamental shifted in his understanding of what it meant to be needed. The word that changed everything came quietly, Harper's small voice as Maxwell was preparing to leave after their visit. "Don't go yet, Daddy." Time stopped, the world narrowing to those 4 words spoken with such casual trust that Maxwell felt his knees weaken, and when he looked at Nora, he saw tears streaming down her face and a nod of permission that meant more than any contract he'd ever signed. Maxwell's vow came out fierce and certain, kneeling so Harper could see his face. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. Daddy's got you." His breakdown in the parking lot afterward was complete and cathartic. 2 years of regret pouring out in sobs that shook his entire body. The weight of everything he'd missed crushing him with delayed grief for the father he should have been from the beginning. Nora found him there, her hand tentative on his shoulder, and her words were careful but honest. "This isn't about me giving you another chance, Maxwell. This is about giving her the opportunity to get to know you. Have you ever been given grace you didn't deserve by someone you destroyed, and understood that redemption isn't a destination, but a daily choice to show up and do better?" Months of showing up transformed Maxwell Grant from billionaire CEO into something far more important, Harper's daddy. And the evolution happened through dance recitals, where he was the only father taking notes, doctor's appointments, where he asked detailed questions about developmental milestones, impromptu sleepovers, when Nora had early morning client calls, and Harper woke up to Maxwell making pancakes shaped like elephants. Learning to braid hair became his obsession, watching YouTube tutorials at midnight and practicing on rope until his fingers understood the pattern. And even though his braids were crooked and loose compared to Nora's perfect work, Harper wore them with pride because Daddy made them. Spare clothes appeared at his penthouse apartment along with a toddler bed shaped like a race car, child-proof locks on cabinets that used to hold expensive liquor, and toys scattered across marble floors that had never seen anything so joyfully chaotic. The transformation others noticed came in waves. Colleagues shocked when Maxwell left board meetings early for parent-teacher conferences. Friends who barely recognized the man reading picture books with voices for every character. Even strangers in parks who watched him push Harper on swings with single-minded devotion. Peter's observation came during a coffee meeting where Maxwell showed up with marker stains on his shirt cuff. "You've really changed, man." Like, fundamentally. Nora's cautious acknowledgement came slower, watching Maxwell's consistency never waver through months that became a year, recognizing that showing up mattered more than perfection, that being present trumped being impressive. Maxwell read The Very Hungry Caterpillar 17 times in one afternoon because Harper demanded it, negotiated about vegetables with toddler logic that somehow always ended with him eating broccoli to prove it was good, found lost stuffed animals with detective-level seriousness because Mr. Elephant's absence was a genuine crisis, and hung crayon drawings on his office walls that became more valuable than any art collection he'd ever owned. Bath time conversation brought the question that had been haunting the edges of their reconstruction, Harper's voice innocent as she played with bubbles. "Why Daddy not live with us?" Nora's gentle explanation about complicated grown-up relationships felt inadequate even as she spoke it, trying to make a 3-year-old understand dynamics that Nora herself was still processing. Harper's simple logic cut through adult complexity with devastating efficiency. "Can get married?" The question lingered long after bath time ended and Harper was tucked into bed, hanging in the air between Nora and Maxwell as they stood in her kitchen with all the unresolved feelings they'd been carefully avoiding. Maxwell spoke his hope carefully, like it might shatter if handled roughly. I'm hoping that maybe one day you'll wake up and decide to give me another chance. Nora's honest response came without anger, just exhausted truth. I'm still healing, Maxwell. His understanding was immediate, genuine. I know. I'm sorry. But Nora's request stopped his apology before it could become another pattern. Stop apologizing and just be present. That's what matters now. Have you ever tried to rebuild something after it's been completely destroyed, understanding that the new version will never be the same as the original, but might be something else entirely? Harper's third birthday party at the park brought friends and cake and celebration. Maxwell and Nora functioning as co-parents with practiced ease that felt almost natural. Not enemies anymore, but not lovers either. Somewhere in the undefined middle, where healing happened slowly. They worked together, setting up decorations and serving cake. Their movements coordinated for months of shared parenting. And when Harper climbed onto Maxwell's shoulders, pointing at clouds and declaring them to be dinosaurs and castles, Nora watched with her hand pressed to her chest, feeling something shift. Peter's question came quietly as they stood apart from the chaos. Think you'll forgive him? Nora's answer was honest in its uncertainty. I don't know. But I'm letting him earn the chance. The sunset cast everything in amber light. Harper's laughter filling the park as she ran between friends with the joy only children possess. And for a moment, they looked like a family not quite whole, but slowly being built from pieces that fit differently than before. The realization settled over Nora like a warm blanket. Sometimes imperfect reconstruction is more beautiful than the original because it bears the marks of everything it survived. Evening on Nora's balcony after Harper was asleep brought the conversation they'd both been avoiding. The city lights spread below them as Nora asked directly what she'd been wondering. Why are you really doing this, Maxwell? His raw honesty came without hedging or protection. Because I'm still in love with you. I never stopped. The vulnerability of admitting it hung between them, and Nora's anger flared not at the feeling, but at the confession itself. You don't get to do that. Say things like that. Her pain resurfaced in waves. Everything he destroyed with 5 words. Everything she'd survived alone. The labor and midnight fevers and first steps with no one to share them. The weight she'd carried while he'd thrown himself into work that meant nothing. Maxwell's clarity came from a year of learning to be honest. I'm not asking for anything, Nora. I just needed you to know the truth. The acknowledgement escaped her lips before she could stop it. It's still too late, Maxwell. His acceptance was complete, no argument or pushback. I know. But that doesn't mean you owe me anything. Tears fell then, both of them crying for different reasons and the same ones. The weight of unresolved feelings and unhealed wounds, and the love that had never actually died, just been buried under hurt. The distance between them remained physical and emotional. And Maxwell's departure left Nora standing alone on the balcony, wondering if healing meant letting go or holding on. Harper stirred inside, calling for Mama in her sleep, and Nora went to her daughter, holding the small body that grounded her in what mattered. Renewing the promise she'd made in a hospital room 2 years ago. Harper would be loved completely, unconditionally, no matter what happened between her parents. More months passed and seasons changed, winter giving way to spring and then summer. Maxwell's consistency never wavering through holidays and ordinary Tuesdays and every day between. The boundaries between them softened gradually. Nora noticing how she didn't tense when Maxwell arrived. How she sometimes lingered in conversations that could have ended sooner. How trust was being rebuilt slowly and carefully like a garden that needs tending every single day. She began seeing him differently. Not the man who'd hurt her, but the father Harper deserved. Not the billionaire who treated her like nothing, but the person who now treated their daughter like everything. Small moments of connection accumulated. Shared glances when Harper did something particularly Harper. Accidental touches that lasted a fraction longer than necessary. Conversations about their daughter that wandered into their own childhoods and dreams and fears. The question hanging between them felt less impossible than it once had. Can love survive after trust is shattered? Can people change enough to deserve second chances? Can broken things ever truly be whole again? Harper's innocent observations pierced through adult complexity. Mama smiles more when Daddy's here. Daddy's eyes get happy when Mama laughs. Peter's wisdom came during a rare moment of adult conversation without children present. Healing doesn't mean forgetting Nora. It means learning to carry the scars while building something new. The park at sunset became their place, amber light casting everything in warmth, Maxwell holding Harper who was getting too big to carry, but he carried her anyway. Nora watching them together and feeling something that might be hope, or might be terror, or might be both. The realization came slowly that maybe, just maybe, second chances are possible not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through showing up every single day, choosing presence over pride, consistency over perfection. The understanding settled deep that some things can't be fixed, can't return to what they were, but they can be rebuilt into something different, something marked by survival and choice and the daily decision to try. A family was being reconstructed from broken pieces, imperfect and beautiful and still unfinished, and the hope that carried them forward was simply this: sometimes the things we break and rebuild become stronger than they ever were intact. Maxwell Grant learned the hardest way that power means nothing without love, and love means nothing without showing up day after ordinary day, in the small moments that build a life worth living. This story carries truths that cut deep if we let them. Accountability means facing the consequences of our choices, even when it destroys us, even when we can't undo the damage we've caused, even when all we can do is stand in the wreckage and finally take responsibility. Redemption isn't a moment or a grand gesture. It's showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Choosing presence over pride every single day until consistency becomes character. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what broke you or pretending the wounds don't exist. It means choosing to rebuild while carrying the scars, understanding that trust shattered can be pieced back together, but it takes time and genuine change and the humility to accept that some things will never be exactly what they were. Love is complicated and contradictory. Sometimes it means letting go of people who can't love you back. Sometimes it means holding on through the hardest seasons. But always it means showing up and doing the work even when every instinct screams to protect yourself from more pain. Parenthood teaches us that consistency matters infinitely more than perfection, that children don't need flawless parents. They need present ones who keep choosing them through mistakes and learning and growth. And trust, that fragile thing we break so easily and rebuild so slowly, can be reconstructed from broken pieces, but only through time and changed behavior and the daily choice to be worthy of the second chance we've been given. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. It tells me you want more stories like this, stories that dig into the messy reality of being human and trying to do better. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone after you broke it? Have you ever gotten a second chance you didn't deserve and had to figure out how to be worthy of it? Have you walked away from someone who couldn't see your worth? Or have you been the person who couldn't see it until it was too late? And if you're new here, subscribe to Mr. John Stories, because every single week we dive deep into stories that matter. Stories that change how you see love and trust and accountability and what it means to be human in a world that makes being human so complicated. Thank you for being here, for staying through this journey.